When my grandparents decided to buy a grand Victorian house for our large family of 8, it seemed like a dream come true. We had always lived in smaller homes, squeezing into spaces that never quite accommodated our bustling family life. The new house, with its towering spires and expansive rooms, promised a fresh start and the space we desperately needed. Our family consisted of my grandparents, my parents, my 2 aunts, and my 2 cousins. We were a close-knit bunch, bound together by shared experiences and a deep sense of loyalty. The decision to move into the Victorian house was driven by my grandfather, a man with an insatiable curiosity and a love for old architecture. He saw potential in the house's faded grandeur and envisioned it as the perfect home for our family. From the moment we arrived, the house seemed to loom over us, its age evident in every creaking floorboard and weathered beam. The exterior was a testament to Victorian craftsmanship, with ornate woodwork and tall, narrow windows that seemed to watch our every move. Despite its grandeur, there was an undeniable air of neglect. It had been many years since the house had seen any semblance of care. Inside, the house was a labyrinth of rooms and hallways, each one revealing glimpses of its former splendor. High ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork, grand fireplaces in every room, and large, drafty windows that let in streams of light and cold air alike. It felt like stepping back in time, into a world that was both enchanting and eerie. My grandfather wasted no time in exploring every nook and cranny of our new home. He spent hours in the attic, fascinated by the potential for additional space. It was during one of these inspections that he found something unusual, a section of the wall that sounded hollow when tapped. Driven by his relentless curiosity, he decided to investigate further. With a few swings of his hammer, he began to dismantle the false wall. Dust and debris filled the air as he worked, revealing a hidden room behind the plaster and wood. What we found was beyond anything we could have imagined. A child's room, untouched and seemingly frozen in time. Old toys lay scattered across the floor. A tiny rocking horse stood in one corner, and small, neatly folded clothes were still in the dresser drawers. The discovery was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. It was as if the room had been sealed off in a hurry, abandoned without a second thought. My grandfather, usually a man of few words, stood silently for a moment, taking in the scene. There was something about that room that felt wrong, a lingering presence that sent a chill down my spine. This hidden room would become the catalyst for a series of strange and terrifying events that would haunt our family for years to come. Little did we know, the house had secrets of its own, and it was only a matter of time before they began to reveal themselves. My grandfather's discovery of the hidden room was nothing short of extraordinary. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when he decided to further investigate the hollow-sounding section of the attic wall. Armed with his tools, he set to work, carefully chipping away at the plaster and wood that concealed the mystery behind it. We gathered around, our breath visible in the cold attic air, watching as he revealed the secrets hidden for decades. As the wall crumbled, a small, dark space began to emerge. With a final, forceful push, my grandfather broke through, and a wave of stale air rushed out, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of age and decay. We peered into the gloom, our eyes gradually adjusting to the dim light filtering in from the attic's single, grimy window. What we saw sent shivers down our spines. The room was perfectly preserved, as if time had stopped the moment it was sealed off. An old wooden rocking horse stood in one corner, its paint chipped and faded, yet its eyes seemed almost lifelike in the shadows. A small bed, neatly made with a patchwork quilt, sat against the far wall. On the floor, toys were scattered about. Tin soldiers, a raggedy doll, and a delicate tea set laid out as if waiting for an imaginary guest. Everywhere we looked, there were remnants of a child's life frozen in time. The dresser still held tiny clothes, neatly folded and untouched by the years. A faded photograph, its edges curled with age, sat on the nightstand, depicting a young boy with a wide, innocent smile. The room was a poignant reminder of a bygone era, yet there was something profoundly unsettling about its untouched state. My grandfather, usually unfazed by such things, stood silently for a moment, taking in the scene. His face was a mixture of awe and unease. He carefully stepped into the room, avoiding the toys on the floor, and picked up the photograph. "Who would leave all this behind?" he murmured, more to himself than to us. My grandmother, ever the practical one, suggested that perhaps the previous owners had left in a hurry and simply forgot about the room. But even she seemed troubled by the discovery. There was an air of mystery that clung to the room, a sense that it held secrets we were not meant to uncover. My parents and aunts, equally fascinated and disturbed, began to speculate about the room's origins. Theories ranged from tragic accidents to hasty departures in the dead of night. My cousins, usually fearless and adventurous, refused to go near the attic after that day. They whispered among themselves about ghosts and haunted toys, their imaginations running wild with the possibilities. As for me, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something that was better left alone. The hidden room, with its eerie preservation and unsettling atmosphere, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was as if the walls were whispering secrets just beyond our hearing, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The initial excitement of the discovery quickly gave way to a pervasive sense of dread. We tried to go about our lives as usual, but the room lingered in the back of our minds, a constant reminder of the house's dark history. Little did we know, this was just the beginning of the strange and terrifying events that would soon engulf our family. The discovery of the hidden room marked the beginning of a series of strange and unsettling events that would plague our family. At first, it was small, almost imperceptible things that could easily be dismissed. But as time went on, the occurrences became harder to ignore. My grandmother was the first to experience something unusual. She had moved into the room closest to the attic, partly because it was the quietest spot in the house, ideal for her late-night reading. One night, as she sat in bed engrossed in her book, she heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. She glanced around, thinking it might be the wind or an old house settling. But the whispers continued, faint and unintelligible, as if someone were murmuring just out of reach. At first, she tried to ignore it, chalking it up to her imagination. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more distinct with each passing night. It was always the same, a low, repetitive murmur that seemed to be coming from the direction of the attic. My grandmother, not one to be easily frightened, decided to investigate. She climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, her heart pounding in her chest. But when she reached the top, the whispers ceased, leaving her in eerie silence. Soon after, she began to hear footsteps. They were soft, almost gentle, like the padding of small feet on the wooden floorboards. The footsteps would start at the far end of the attic and move slowly towards her room, stopping just outside her door. Each night, she would brace herself, expecting the door to creak open, but it never did. The footsteps would stop, and the house would fall silent once more. Despite her growing unease, my grandmother didn't mention the occurrences to anyone else. She didn't want to worry the family or seem as though she was losing her mind. Instead, she quietly moved out of the room, citing the cold draft as her reason. My aunt, unaware of the strange happenings, moved into the room shortly after. It didn't take long for the eerie events to escalate. Almost immediately, she began to notice the same whispers and footsteps that had plagued my grandmother. But for her, the experiences were even more disturbing. One morning, my aunt woke up with a start. She felt an odd sensation on her skin, like a faint pressure. As she sat up and turned on the light, she saw them. Small, child-sized handprints all over her arms and legs. They were faint but unmistakable, as if a child had pressed their hands against her while she slept. She was horrified, but tried to rationalize it, thinking perhaps she had brushed against something in her sleep. However, the handprints reappeared night after night, in different places on her body. The occurrences didn't stop there. My aunt would often hear the sound of children giggling, soft and eerie, echoing through the hallway. She also heard the familiar footsteps, always stopping just outside her door. Despite changing the locks and securing the windows, the handprints and noises continued, leaving her in a state of perpetual fear. The family began to notice her growing distress. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a constant air of anxiety. When she finally confided in us about what was happening, we were all deeply unsettled. My grandparents, ever pragmatic, suggested moving her to a different room, hoping that a change of environment would help. But the disturbances followed her, spreading to other parts of the house. We tried everything to make sense of what was happening. We brought in experts, paranormal investigators, mediums, even a priest, but nothing seemed to help. The house had a grip on us, and it wasn't letting go. As the events continued to unfold, our family's sense of safety and normalcy was shattered. We lived in constant fear, always on edge, waiting for the next whisper, the next handprint, the next sign that we were not alone. As the unsettling occurrences continued, my cousins became the next to experience the house's eerie phenomena. Initially, they were excited about the move, imagining adventures and secret hideouts within the sprawling Victorian mansion. But their excitement quickly turned to fear as they, too, began to encounter inexplicable events. It started with the laughter, soft, high-pitched giggles that echoed through the hallways late at night. My cousins would lie in their beds, wide-eyed and clutching their blankets, as the sounds of children's laughter floated through the house. It was always the same, a brief burst of giggles, followed by silence. They would huddle together, too frightened to investigate, and too scared to sleep. Then came the footsteps. Just like my grandmother and aunt, my cousins heard the distinct sound of small feet padding up and down the stairs. The footsteps would start slowly, methodically, then suddenly rush down the hallway, stopping abruptly outside their bedroom doors. Every time they mustered the courage to open the door, they found nothing but an empty hallway. One particularly terrifying night, my youngest cousin, Tommy, woke up to the sensation of someone tugging at his blanket. Groggy and disoriented, he opened his eyes to see the faint outline of a child standing at the foot of his bed. He screamed, waking the entire household, but when we rushed to his room, there was no one there. He was shaking, pointing to where he had seen the figure, but all we found was the blanket, neatly folded at the foot of his bed. These experiences began to wear on the entire family. We were constantly on edge, our nerves frayed by the nightly disturbances. My parents and grandparents tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the fear was palpable. Simple tasks like going to bed or walking through the hallways became fraught with anxiety. The once vibrant and lively house was now shrouded in a veil of unease and dread. In an effort to find some logical explanation, my father started researching the house's history. He spent hours poring over old records, hoping to find something that could explain the phenomena. He discovered that the house had changed hands numerous times over the years, with many of the previous owners leaving abruptly. There were vague mentions of tragic events, but nothing concrete that could explain the strange occurrences. We also brought in experts, hoping that a scientific approach could shed light on the situation. Paranormal investigators set up cameras and recording devices, but their findings were inconclusive. They captured faint whispers and unexplained shadows, but nothing that could definitively explain what was happening. Mediums walked through the house, claiming to feel the presence of restless spirits, but their attempts to communicate yielded no answers. Desperation led us to call in a priest to bless the house. He walked from room to room, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers. For a brief moment, we hoped that this might bring us some peace. But the disturbances only seemed to intensify afterwards, as if the house was angered by our attempts to cleanse it. The family's attempts to debunk or rationalize the phenomena only deepened our fear and confusion. We were left with more questions than answers, and the sense that we were dealing with something beyond our understanding. The house, with its dark history and hidden room, seemed to be a living entity, feeding off our fear and growing stronger each day. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the once dream home had become a nightmare. We were prisoners in our own house, trapped by an unseen force that seemed to have no intention of letting us go. Our family, once close-knit and full of life, was now fractured and fearful, each of us haunted by the unseen presence that lurked in the shadows. The house's eerie grip on our family extended far beyond the strange occurrences experienced by my grandmother, aunt, and cousins. It dug its claws into my own psyche, manifesting in recurring nightmares that left me trembling and drenched in sweat. Every night, without fail, I found myself back in that cursed attic. The dream always began the same way. I stood at the bottom of the narrow staircase, staring up into the darkness. An unseen force compelled me to climb, my feet moving against my will. Each step echoed ominously, the wooden boards creaking under my weight. As I reached the top, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread enveloped me. In the attic, the hidden room awaited, its door slightly ajar. A faint light seeped through the crack, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist on the floor. I could hear the whispers, low and insistent, calling my name, urging me to enter. My hand would reach for the doorknob, shaking with fear. The moment I touched it, the door would swing open, revealing the frozen-in-time child's room. The toys and furniture, preserved in their eerie state, seemed to come to life in my nightmares. The rocking horse would sway gently, the tin soldiers would march in place, and the doll's eyes would follow me wherever I moved. In the corner, the photograph of the young boy seemed to shift, his innocent smile transforming into a sinister grin. But the worst part of the dream was the presence I felt, something unseen, lurking just beyond my field of vision. It was as if the very walls of the house were alive, watching and waiting. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, until they became a cacophony of voices, all demanding my attention. I would wake up screaming, my heart racing, the whispers still ringing in my ears. These nightmares took a toll on me. I became withdrawn and anxious, always looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. My grades suffered, and I found it hard to concentrate on anything for more than a few minutes. Sleep became a dreaded necessity, and I would do everything I could to avoid it, fearing what awaited me in my dreams. The psychological impact of the house extended to the entire family. My grandparents, once the pillars of strength, became frail and distant. My grandfather's curiosity had turned to obsession, and he spent hours researching the house's history, hoping to find some explanation for the horrors we were experiencing. My grandmother, once practical and unflappable, was now a shadow of her former self, haunted by the whispers and footsteps that never seemed to leave her alone. My parents tried to hold us together, but the strain was evident. They fought more often, their tempers short and patience thin. My aunts and cousins, too, were deeply affected. The younger ones, in particular, seemed to have lost their innocence, their laughter replaced by fearful glances and whispered conversations. We eventually moved out of the house, unable to bear its oppressive presence any longer. But even after we left, its shadow loomed over us. The nightmares followed me to our new home, and the sense of dread never fully dissipated. It was as if the house had marked us, leaving an indelible scar on our souls. Years later, I still find myself drawn back to that Victorian mansion in my dreams. The attic, the hidden room, and the whispers are always there, waiting for me. The unresolved mystery of the house lingers, a dark chapter in our family history that refuses to close. I've tried to piece together the puzzle, to understand what happened in that house and why it targeted us. But the answers remain elusive, hidden behind the whispers and shadows. The house, with its secrets and terrors, continues to haunt me, a reminder of the unknown and the unknowable. In the end, we may never fully understand the forces at play in that house. It remains a lingering dread, a ghostly presence that hovers at the edge of our consciousness. And perhaps that's the true horror of it all, the knowledge that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, and some fears are destined to stay with us forever.